Hello everyone, I'm Swiz, and who here has used serverless before with their front-end apps? Perfect, perfect. I love the sunshade, this was great. So let's say you're building an app, and it's a really cool app, you can do it all on the front end, like, I don't know, I'm not gonna come up with an example right now, but you're building this really cool app and you're really enjoying it, and it's great because it's an SPA and everything that the Remix and then Next.js people hate, because it's rendered in the browser, it can be kind of slow, it has a lot of loading spinners while it talks to APIs and all of that stuff, but it's really easy to build. You can build it as a static file, you put it up on a CDN, it's served from the edge, works like time to first byte, amazing. All of that is great. And then you decide, what if I started making some money with this app? What do I need to talk to a Stripe API to do some checkouts? Or what if I want to send an email and I need to talk to a service that only does backend? And oh my God, it's like, oops, too much. Everything just explodes in your face. You get the whole iceberg of the web just splashing up in your face, and it's like, suddenly you need to think about Nginx and Apache and reverse gateways and secrets, and the secrets that can only live on the back end and cannot possibly go on the front end, because I've done that once. I leaked my AWS token on GitHub, and their bots caught me and blocked my Amazon account 2 hours before my workshop that was supposed to be using those tokens. So that was fun. Don't leak your tokens. They will find you. And it's nice, in my case, Amazon found me and told me, yo, you're doing something that you shouldn't. But it could also be, you know, a hacker extraordinaire from somewhere in the world where they don't care about those things and rack up a $10,000 bill on AWS, and oops, because that happens. Like, I don't know how much you've dealt with AWS, but it gets pretty complicated to the point where I know people whose entire job it is to help companies spend less money on AWS. And it just seems crazy that such a thing is possible in this ecosystem. But anyway, the nice thing is, well, the terrible thing about having to use a backend when you go from a purely front-end app to needing a backend for that one little thing that you just wanted to add really quick, and suddenly it all blows up in your face, is that it's really annoying. I've talked to a number of people who were telling me, yeah, you know, I would make a lot of side projects, I have a lot of these great ideas, but I feel like by the time I set everything up, I get my backend ready, I get my Express set up, I get my SSL certs, my VM set up, all of that, I'm like, well, it's been a week, I no longer care about my cool idea, so I'm just gonna go back to my day job. So what if instead your backend could look something like this? It's just a JavaScript function that something magically in the cloud calls when you hit a URL, and then you do some stuff with that JavaScript function and you return a response. In this case, it's a very simple example that just hello world, returns a 200 status code and says hello. But the idea here is, and what I really like about serverless, is that the modern backend is really just a JavaScript function. So if you can write a JavaScript function that is mostly pure, that takes some inputs, in this case from request parameters, similar to what you would do in Express, or I think Vercel uses a similar approach where they have the rec object and you get params and you get a parsed URL, body stuff, and all of that is just kind of done for you by the platform. All you have to think about is how to write the actual business logic that you care about. If you're integrating with Stripe, you would probably read some secrets from some sort of secrets manager. You would make a request to Stripe, you would get back a response that says, this is great, the user paid, and then you would send that back to your front end to do your thing. And actually, a really interesting example, does anyone here know Wordle? Okay. So I was listening to a really cool podcast with the Wordle guy, I think it was Syntax FM. He built entire Wordle purely as a front-end app that saves state in local storage because he didn't want to deal with all of this stuff. And that's the reason why your Wordle scores don't go across computers, is because this is too hard, and adding a backend and actual persistent state is just too much work and not worth it for something that you can then sell for, what was it, $10 million or something like that? You know, why would you go through all that trouble just to make a few $1,000,000? So, you know, the modern backend is a JavaScript function, and what's cool is that we have all of these platforms that Kent was talking about yesterday, where you just write the business logic and then somebody else takes care of everything else. So I think what serverless really did, it's great. It does all of the VM stuff and takes care of effectively using computers and scales down to 0 when you don't have any traffic and all of that stuff. That's great. What I really like about serverless is the ease of use it gives to engineers, the push it gave us towards infrastructure as code and not having to think about DevOps. I know there's people who are going to murderize me if I say this, but I really think that in the future we're going to stop doing DevOps because it's all going to be automated, and the nerds are going to worry about physical servers and the 5 nines of availability and getting you your Git integration, scaling from 0 to global scale, taking care of your domains and SSL and all of that stuff. We're just going to write the code and have fun. I don't know, I feel like the more time I spend in DevOps land, the less time I'm spending in doing things that actually provide value to my users. And I know that's, like, I'm happy we're not at an AWS conference, because I would get kicked out right now. But you know, that's what I like. Like, you know, when you're cooking pasta, you don't think about how to grow wheat and then make a pasta and then grow a tomato and all of that. You just go to the store, you get yourself some pasta ingredients, and you make a great sauce, because the sauce is what you care about. And if anyone's interested in that, there's a guy on the internet who tried to make a burger from scratch, and it took him like 3 or 4 years or something. It's a really long YouTube series. But it turns out, like, he went as far as trying to make the toaster from scratch, because you need to make toast for a burger. So yeah, you know, people do all sorts of crazy things, but we don't have to, because we're engineers. But I think what's also interesting is that while I was writing a book on serverless and I was thinking about what serverless brings to us and all of the cool things we can do now that somebody else is taking care of all of the boring stuff, there's been like a small revolution that happened in the background while I wasn't looking with modern frameworks. Things like Remix, I think Kent was talking about this yesterday, and Next.js does this as well, where you don't even really have to think about the serverless part anymore. So this is an example straight from the Next.js, docs. I might be getting it wrong, so I know there's a lot of Next.js experts here. Talk to them later and ask them if Suez got it wrong and he should not be giving talks anymore. But I know that Ken said yesterday that Remix does this. And what's interesting about this is that this is one file that defines a page of your app, and you have the front-end portion and the back-end portion all in the same file. And then at the framework level, when that framework is integrated with the platform you're using, it just extracts the stuff that's supposed to run on the server and takes care of it for you. You don't even have to think about making an API anymore, or oh, this part is code that runs on the server and I have to do it this special way, or I have to think about requests and responses. It really is just a function that does some stuff and returns, in this case, props for the page component to use and load with and do. I think this would be, if I remember from yesterday. No, this is not SSR. I always get those confused. And there's too many abbreviations that just mean the server makes the HTML and sends it to the client. But anyway, what's really cool with, I think, I know Remix does this, I think Next.js does it, I think Gatsby is either working on it or has it already, where you're just writing your page, you're writing your component, and a part of it is running on the server, a part of it is running on the front end, and the framework is taking care of that. You don't have to think about it at all, which is really cool, because I spend way too much time on the back end and it's not as fun as the front end. So what we're getting to is that there's this spectrum of complexity. I guess you could call it the iceberg of the web, or you could call it the spectrum, whatever you like. But if you choose the right framework, and that framework fits what you're doing, plus it's tightly integrated with the platform you're using, that makes it super easy. But you also have less control over what exactly is happening. This is usually what you see, why it's so much more fun to work on your side project than on your day job, is because the day job has so much complexity that probably accumulated over multiple years when these technologies didn't exist yet, or they did exist, but then they were a little hacky. Like, I remember integrating with alpha APIs, and then suddenly they come out with a beta, and it's like, why did we do all this work? Oh, because we couldn't just wait 3 months. But you know, then but it gives you less control. So at a day job, usually you get a lot of really complex stuff that requires more control. So then you have to go towards the other side of the spectrum, where you get back to this traditional notion of building a client and a server, because we're talking about serverless, and there's a whole day of that tomorrow. Your server can still be pretty simple, but you have to think about that complexity. You have to think about code that's running on the server has to be, it's still JavaScript, it's still just a JavaScript function, but you have to do it a little differently than you would on the front end. If nothing else, there are different libraries available in Node.js than they are on the client. Then you have to think about how do you design your API, and you have and do all of that stuff, which is surprisingly harder than writing the actual code. So we're not going to get into it. But it gives you more control. If you go to that other side of the spectrum, you can do a lot bigger things. You can start doing like there's this site I saw called like a functional backend app, where you just use serverless components that talk to each other, but then you have to think about, basically it gets kind of complicated, but not too complicated, because the code itself is still just a JavaScript function. But I feel like I'm kind of rambling, so I'm going to wrap up. The point is, if you can write JavaScript, which I think all of you can, these days you can do backend. You don't have to know all of the weird DevOps stuff and Git integrations, all of that. There are people taking care of that for you. So you can just write your JavaScript, focus on the backend logic, and if you need a little bit more complexity than what a modern framework integrated with a platform can do for you, I wrote a little book called Serverless Handbook .dev that's kind of trying to teach serverless from scratch to really in-depth for front-end engineers. So, thank you. That's it.